Hi there and welcome to Power Play. I'm Vashi Capellos in Ottawa on this Thursday. Tonight, out with the old, in with the new, kind of.
We're making Canada the best place to invest, the best place to build, the best place to build clean.
The Carney government cancels another Trudeau-era environmental policy, discarding EV sales mandates, but bringing back purchase rebates. It's a move the feds say will protect Canada's auto industry in the face of U.S. President Donald Trump's threats. Will it do that? Up first, Industry Minister Melanie Joly. Then we're going to hear from the Conservatives' Labour critic, Kyle Seeback. Then, a solo trade trip to D.C.
I've been having some very productive, promising, and positive conversations with the White House, with the State Department, with senators representing border states that we do a lot of business with in Canada.
Conservative MP Jamil Jivani is in Washington right now, in and out of what he says have been productive meetings with the White House and State Department. Will his longtime friendship with Vice President J.D. Vance help cool trade tensions between Canada and the U.S., or is he going rogue? We're going to talk about that. Plus, a blast from the past. What were you doing in 2006? We asked that question to our front bench panelists, Christy Clark, Marco Mendicino, James Moore, and Monte Solberg, who will all be here a little bit later on. They're going to reflect on how politics has changed in the last 2 decades, with this week marking 20 years since Stephen Harper became Prime Minister. That's coming up shortly. First, though.
I think it's clear from the lesson of what's been happening over the course of the last year that the previous arrangements were more effective, and we're going to work hard to move back towards that, as is the Mexican government, as I think I can speak for the auto sector as a whole, has given extensive consultations. That's what the auto sector thinks is in the best interests as well. That said, what we're doing today is robust to whatever tariff outcome happens in that review.
Prime Minister Mark Carney there unveiling a new auto sector strategy the feds say will make the industry less reliant on gas-powered vehicles and, as you heard there, less dependent on the U.S. Here's a breakdown. The government says they'll scrap the electric vehicle sales mandate, another Trudeau-era environmental policy now gone. Instead, they're promising new emission standards to be detailed in the future. And rebates are returning, with the government launching a 5-year EV affordability program to the tune of $2.3 billion. The rebate is $5,000 for EVs, $2,500 for plug-in hybrids. The rebates apply to vehicles not just made in Canada, but in countries we have free trade deals with. Ontario Premier Doug Ford was absent from the Fed's announcement, but in his own press conference was asked if he'd consider provincial EV rebates.
We took a different approach. I remember when I first got elected, we were giving rebates to millionaires that were buying $100,000 Teslas. We decided to take a different approach. We invested billions of dollars into domestic-made cars, and the Prime Minister wants to support incentives. By all means, whatever it takes to protect our auto workers.
Melanie Joly is the Federal Minister of Industry. Hi, Minister. Pleasure, as always, to welcome you back to the program. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you.
The new strategy that you and the Prime Minister announced today appears to be all in on EVs. How can you be sure, given the volatility in the North American market and your government's history with that sector, that it's the right decision?
Well, first and foremost, it is all in for automaking in Canada. So it is supporting Toyota, Honda, that are producing 77% of all our auto production, obviously in Canada. It is to support also those working in Windsor, in Oakville, in Oshawa. So it is first and foremost a Buy Canada policy. And then, of course, we also believe that the future of the industry is EV. Why? Because by 2035, we know that 40% of EVs, that the cars sold in the world will be EVs. We know that. And so while it is happening in Europe, it is happening in Asia and Latin America, everywhere. The only place in the world where that has not really been happening as much is really North America. But we know that that's the trend. And so while other countries are taking their own decisions, and while we can't control what's going on in Washington, we need to make sure that we embrace progress. it is our promise to auto workers that they will continue to have great jobs in the future. And so that's why we're also investing in electrification.
And certainly I understand the motivation, right? And I wouldn't try to say that your government wants anything other than to make sure the sector is around. But I also think part of my job is making sure that what you're promising will actually result in that. And when I look at the record of the Liberals in this sector, there are major challenges presented. For example, I can think back to 2022 when then the minister who occupied your portfolio at the time, François-Philippe Champagne, said, "Today is proof that Canada's auto sector is here for the long term." And that was when you were announcing more federal money going towards GM and Ingersoll and Oshawa. You know as well as our viewers know what has happened now. There are other examples of billions of dollars that your government promised because the EV sector was going to be the sector of the future, and things dramatically changed, and we're having trouble recouping those costs. Why in this instance should Canadians trust your government is doing something that will keep the sector alive when that has not been the case?
And I think that's a fair question. And that was the question we were struggling with, which was, you know, how can we make sure that we protect our auto base, our industrial base, and at the same time, how can we be ambitious? And that's why we were, I think, able to square the circle. Because when you look at it, after 10 years of investment, even nearly 15 years of investments in the auto sector, the biggest investments are now actually happening and hiring people, because it is what happened in Windsor with LG and Stellantis building a battery plant, and people, you know, the company is still hiring, and at term it's 3,000 jobs. St. Thomas, so basically the Volkswagen plant in St. Thomas is being built as we speak, and it is to hire 3,000 people, and the hiring has already started. So these investments are transforming communities. At the same time, what we're doing is we're making sure that our investment in defense, particularly I must say, submarine procurement, is able to, through submarine procurement, we're able to attract either investments from Korea or from Germany. And also, we know that there's lots of interest by Chinese companies to invest in Canada and produce cars here, but we want to make sure that auto workers are protected, so we'll favor unionization. We want to make sure that the software in these cars is also safe, and we want to make sure that there's a local supply chain, so basically our small and medium-sized businesses can support these investments. So all that to say, it is, I agree, an ambitious approach, but we also think that the North American market, Vashi, will continue to change. And we think we should not be naive, and we think that there may be Chinese investments coming in the future in other parts of North America. So basically, our goal is to leapfrog what is going on in the North American market and be able to also produce the best cars in the world for the world. So basically not being hostage of our geography here in North America, but also to be able to export around the world.
I do want to ask you about the question of Chinese investment and more largely the kind of affordability pitch in allowing for 49,000, for example, Chinese EVs to enter the market. I remember when you occupied the position of Minister of Foreign Affairs and the centrality of the Indo-Pacific strategy at the time, which I think it was November of 2022 that you announced that strategy. You said that China seeks to shape the global environment at that time into one that is more permissive to interests and values that increasingly depart from ours. The China of 1970, to quote your own words, is not the China of today. China is an increasingly disruptive global power. I understand the point your government has made that the world has changed, that the United States has changed. But Minister, with all due respect, China has not changed. Why is opening up the market to China a good idea?
Well, first and foremost, we've been victims of the U.S. trade war against us. So our goal is to make sure that we're able to find new markets. At the same time, I must say that it's eyes wide open. We made sure that we would be having guardrails in this important agreement that we've been able to sign with China. Our goal was to resolve a lot of the outstanding issues, which had to be resolved. It was important for canola farmers to be able to have access to the Chinese market, same for our fishers. But at the same time, China is investing around the world and exporting EVs around the world. It is the case in Europe. It is the case also across Asia. What we've done, I think, is something that is very unique, but we believe that it is our way to not only benefit from our great expertise, because we have some of the biggest auto parts companies in the world, Linamar, Martin Ria, Magna, which are all headquartered in Ontario. But at the same time, we think that attracting investments from Chinese automakers working in joint ventures with Canadian companies is the way to really be able to embrace this new technology that has been developed by China, and that will be able to offer cheaper EVs and also quality EVs. So not a lot of jurisdictions are able to do that in the world. Magna, Canadian company, is already building for a Chinese company in Austria, XPeng, and they're already in China. So these are just examples of what we intend to do for the Canadian market. And I think that in time, it will be good for the North American market also, but not only the North American market. I really think that because we have 51 free trade agreements with the world, we can export elsewhere.
And I take the point about the economics of again, trying to diversify, make EVs more affordable. But I see no evidence, unless you do, that China is a less disruptive global power. And your government has made decisions now to open a market that you have, talked about how important it is to the Canadian economy, open up a market to Chinese investments in the auto sector, to open up more Chinese investment in oil and gas, for example, another critical asset for Canada. Is that a mistake given your own assessment of China just a few short years ago?
Well, I think things have changed. When you make assessments, it's based also on the context in which you're making them. And the U.S. has decided to change its course when it comes to trade. And Canadian auto workers are the first victims of that. And so, of course, we'll continue to seek a good agreement with the U.S. and with Mexico. We will obviously put a lot of time and efforts in the renewal and revision of the CUSMA agreement. But at the same time, the negotiations that we've had with China have been more predictable and much more stable than the experience we've had with the U.S. And that's a statement I made a month ago, and I stand by my statement, because we're not the only ones experiencing that. Ask the question to Europeans, ask the questions to the Japanese, ask the question to the Koreans. They're experiencing the same reality as we are.
Don't you think, though, with respect, Minister, that that's by design by China, that they see the world as it is right now and want to seize on the moment for less than altruistic purposes?
Well, it's up for them to answer that question. Our approach will be always to defend our national interests, to defend basically our workers, to create opportunities here in the country. And so we're always reacting to what is happening in the White House, and that was certainly our approach in 2025. But actually, I must say, in 2026, we have a plan, and we're implementing it. And so we won't be always just waiting to see what will happen. We need to be able to be in charge of our own destiny. That's why we came up with this new auto strategy. And that is why we know there's lots of change. We know that that can be very stressful for families across those working across the auto sector. But we will support them, and we will accompany them as we're embracing this change, and we will make sure that we're creating new jobs. And you know what? That's what happened in the 80s. In the 80s, the D3 were shutting down plants across Ontario and Quebec. It was really difficult. I still have memories of the closure of GM in Sainte-Thérèse, Quebec. And you know what happened? The government at the time, the progressive conservatives of Brian Mulroney, decided to go to Japan and attract Japanese automakers. And now where are we? 77% of our auto production is Honda and Toyota. So that's why we're looking at other options. Germany, Korea, China, and that's what we need to do, because we cannot be just stuck in the same approach.
I understand it. I guess I would just quickly point out Japan and China are definitely not the same kind of world actor. But very quickly before I let you go, Minister, if I could ask you about Jamil Jivani, the Conservative MP who headed to the United States. He said that he was going to meet, and I don't have confirmation, this is just through his social media channels, that he was going to meet with GM. And I just wondered if he had asked for a briefing or if you had offered one.
No, I think it's because I actually called him on it, saying that as MP in charge of Oshawa constituents that are working at GM, that are losing their job, why is he just embracing the Trump administration that is putting tariffs on them and having them, lose their job? And why is he basically not denouncing the U.S. auto tariffs? And that's just a question that across Oshawa people are asking.
He says he can be of help to the government by going there. Do you think that's possible?
I'm not in his heart nor in his mind. I'm just looking at what he says and what are the facts. And until I actually said on television that he was not talking and denouncing the GM layoffs, he didn't talk about it. And now he's talking about it. So I think, basically it talks for itself.
I'll leave it on that note. Minister, I appreciate your time as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
That's Industry Minister Melanie Joly with the government's take. After a short break, we'll hear from the opposition. The Conservatives' labor critic Kyle Seeback is my next guest. There he is, back with me in just 2 minutes.
Canada continues to favor a zero tariff regime with the United States in autos, because we know that will deliver the strongest North American auto industry.
Prime Minister Mark Carney's take on the value of zero tariffs, a comment that came during his announcement of a new auto strategy. Zero tariffs appear a no-go for the White House, though. Take a listen to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent after he was asked what would happen if Canada dropped all counter tariffs. Would the U.S., for example, follow suit?
Absolutely not. As we saw last week, 2 weeks ago, when Prime Minister Carney went to China, he lowered tariffs on Chinese EVs from 100% to 6%. U.S. has a 100% tariff on Chinese EVs. We couldn't let our northern border be used as a way for Chinese EVs to come into the U.S.
Just before the break, you heard from Industry Minister Melanie Joly on her government's new auto strategy. To give us perspective from the opposition, Conservative labor critic Kyle Seeback is with us live in studio right now. Hi, Mr. Seeback. It's great to see you. Thank you for making the time.
Hi, glad to be here again.
So I've done a series of interviews today in reaction to the auto strategy announcement. The union, Car Manufacturers Association, Car Parts Association. I can't find a single stakeholder who is unhappy with this. Why is your party?
Well, I think, first of all, I looked at those statements and it's pretty weak sauce. None of them are like bullish, like this is fantastic. But here's the problem. Right now, as you talked about, we have 10% tariffs on all vehicles that we export to the United States. And what is going to happen with this zero-emission vehicle subsidy rebate is that American-made vehicles are actually going to be the primary beneficiary of these, because less than 5% of the vehicles we manufacture in Canada actually will qualify for this rebate. So it's really strange when the Americans are tariffing our vehicles and we are actually, in effect, subsidizing theirs. Like, imagine if you were a Brampton auto worker who was supposed to be building the Jeep Compass EV. And that was transferred to the United States, right? The production is going to be there. And the taxes that those workers paid into the system are going to be used to give subsidies for people that buy those vehicles. So look, I think if you're an auto worker in Canada, you're not very happy with this because so few are going to benefit from it.
So I'm certainly sympathetic, as you described, to the situation of somebody who, saw their job essentially transferred to the United States. My understanding of the policy going forward is that essentially the rebate would apply to countries that we do free trade with.
Correct.
If Canada were to say, at this moment in time, ahead of a review of CUSMA, hey, by the way, it's every one of those countries except you, the United States, how do you think that would play out?
Well, look, I don't know that that's what's going to happen. But what we do know right now is we make about 1.3 million vehicles in Canada. And those are predominantly internal combustion engine vehicles. A very small slice of that are EVs. So the predominant winners in this are going to be the Americans who produce the EVs that we buy, or other foreign companies that produce those. So why didn't they come up with a policy that would benefit all auto workers, like what we've talked about, taking the HST off of all Canadian-made vehicles? That would actually be a much bigger rebate for all vehicles than the $2,500 or the $5,000, and it would actually secure auto workers' jobs. I found it really interesting that the Prime Minister didn't announce this at an auto assembly plant. He certainly didn't go to the Brampton plant to talk about this. Why? Because he knows it's actually not very good news for most of the vehicles that we manufacture here in Canada.
So two things. First, one is this is about EVs, and I take your point on Canadian, the portion of the market that's made here in Canada. But there is an acknowledgement of that in the policy, insofar as the price cap that will apply to countries that we do have free trade agreements with will not apply to any of the vehicles made in Canada. Secondarily, the Prime Minister also announced today that they are looking at changing essentially the remission structure to allow for additional credits to go to automakers that make their cars, like for each car that they make here in Canada. Is that not more in line with what you're talking about? And does that not address the issues that you're raising?
Well, it's not. First of all, we just don't produce that many EVs in Canada. I don't have the exact number, but since we've been producing EVs in Canada, we've produced around 40,000 vehicles in total, EVs in Canada, that are bought and sold in Canada. So it's a very, very, very small number. So even if they're trying to add additional incentives, is that going to bring back the Brampton Compass plant to manufacture the Jeep Compass EV? No, it's not, because we've heard nothing about that. Is it going to help the workers in all the other plants that are building internal combustion engines? No, it's not. Will it create enough incentives for the companies to make these kinds of investments? It certainly doesn't look like it. So again, it's going to primarily benefit, yes, a few vehicles that we produce in Canada, but by and large, this is helping, Donald Trump's Buy America policy, because we're going to be buying a lot more American EVs, which would make him very happy.
My point, though, about the remission changes, or the changes to the structure of remission, would not just apply to EVs. It's essentially a way to address the bigger problem that you identify, I think very rightly so, that a lot of what we import comes from the United States, that we remain very reliant on it, and that what we're trying to do, if we're going to see the sector survive, is to rev up the domestic market. The change in credits, like allowing for additional credits to automakers that make more cars in Canada, isn't just for EVs.
Well, look, giving credits is one thing, but actually reducing the taxes so that you would be able to purchase more Canadian vehicles is a much more efficient use. So they're going to try and apply for some credits. I don't know how they're going to apply. I don't think the government has fully fleshed out how they're going to apply. But what we do know is that the Conservative position, which in fact we came up with in consultation with the auto union workers, is that taking the HST off of all Canadian-made vehicles would spur domestic supply, right? Spur domestic purchasing, and would guarantee those jobs. We're hemorrhaging jobs in the auto sector. 5,000 jobs in the last little while, plus additional spin-offs. I haven't heard anyone, whether any of the auto unions, any of the Canadian vehicle manufacturers, saying that this is going to bring back any of these jobs.
So the quote that I pulled from the union around the changes to the remission structure that I mentioned, and the potential kind of, it's a really structural difference that it would entail from a trade agreement perspective, is that the government is giving itself an opportunity to explore all options, to expand its remission program, and think strategically, about leveraging our vehicle market to secure long-term investments. This is a chance for Canada to be propositional in its demands of automakers and to get work back into our plants. So there, Lana Payne is directly drawing a link between those changes and the ability to bring workers back, contrary to what you just said.
Well, it could do that, right? But we don't know. What we do know is that the 10% tariffs that are in place by the United States is dramatically affecting our ability to export cars. Most cars that we manufacture in Canada actually get exported to the United States. There's been no progress on removing the tariffs that Donald Trump has imposed, and this will do nothing to remove those tariffs. So when we look at this, how is it actually going to create any of the jobs that you're talking about? It's going to mostly benefit American and foreign-made EVs. It's not going to do much with the internal combustion engine production, which is where 125,000 auto and auto-related workers work and build 1.3 million vehicles per year. There's a better plan. We outlined that better plan, which is to take the HST off of all Canadian-made vehicles. It's a level playing field for everyone. It's not complicated, and it's actually supported by the auto unions.
You made 2 points, though, when you started off. Initially, it was being critical of the idea that the Americans would benefit from this, right? And at the same time, you just said you haven't been able to remove those tariffs that exist in the first place. And again, I'll sort of circle back to where I started, which is if we said to everybody, hey, we're going to give these rebates to everyone but you, the United States, do you think that the White House would be more likely to remove the tariffs?
I don't know. It's hard to speculate if that's going to be the case. President Trump's very unpredictable. We know this. So going in with something that could be beneficial, it might not be. But what we go back to is, as it's designed right now, when Donald Trump has put tariffs on Canadian vehicles, that is very clearly hurting our Canadian auto workers and Canadian auto production. Why would this have been designed to exclude them from the get-go? Like, why are most of these subsidies going to be used to purchase vehicles that are manufactured in the United States, including the Jeep Compass EV, which was supposed to be manufactured in Brampton? So,
do you really think explicitly the purpose of this was to just benefit the Americans? Like, I think that, wouldn't the unions and the car companies and all of them be saying that right now if that were the case?
Well, look, I think that this is the unintended consequence of a very poorly thought out policy. I don't think they thought this through. In fact, I think the Chinese EVs that are coming in, 50,000 worth, right, tariff-free, plus the subsidy of other reduced tariffs, the new subsidies now. This is to shore up the Liberal Party's green base. It is not to actually help Canadian auto workers. The Liberals have moved more and more towards the Conservatives on every issue, and they're worried about losing support on their environmental flank. So these policies are designed to shore that up, but at the expense of Canadian auto workers. They could take the industrial carbon tax off to help auto workers as well. There's so many levers that they could do to do this, but instead they're doing something that I think primarily benefits themselves in keeping their base together and the people that want to buy EVs.
One final question for you. If they were all about the environment and trying to shore up their environmental flank by this, wouldn't they have just kept the EV mandates? I mean, they took away one of their central emissions reductions planks in order to, in their view, and what the stakeholders were asking for, be a boon to the industry.
Well, look, I'm glad they finally came to the realization, which what Conservatives were saying, that the EV mandates were not enforceable. We'd never make them. They had to get there because all the auto manufacturers said we'll never get there. The charging network isn't there. The electricity capacity isn't there. The generating capacity isn't there. They saw the writing on the wall on that, so they came up with something else. But what I know for sure and for a fact is this is not going to repatriate a single Canadian auto worker's job. And in fact, I think it's going to have the opposite effect.
I lied. One more question I just thought of. I was thinking, we were talking about GM. One of your colleagues, Jamil Jivani, is in Washington right now. He says meeting with people in the White House as well as people in the State Department. Is that a visit that was sanctioned by the leader of your party, Mr. Poilievre?
I don't know the answer to that question, but what I will say is this. I'm glad someone's down there trying to get the tariffs taken off because we're getting no progress from the current government.
Do you think, though, like heading there on a trip that isn't in conjunction with the government at a time where Donald Trump clearly wants to leverage any weakness in the cohesion of this country is a good idea? I'm not taking away from what his motivation might be.
Sure.
But like, is that really the right thing to do?
I don't think it's weakness. Like the Liberals constantly talk about we need all hands on board to try and deal with this. He has connections in the United States from his history. Using that to try and help the Canadian trade issue, I don't think can be a bad thing.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Mr. Seeback, thanks for your time today. I appreciate it very much.
Thanks very much for having me.
Kyle Seeback is the Conservatives' labor critic. After a short break, we've got more Power Play, and our front bench is here to talk about a couple of things, including that visit to the United States, and we'll reflect on 20 years since Stephen Harper became Prime Minister. That front bench, of course, includes Christy Clark, Marco Mendicino, James Moore, and Monte Solberg. They're all here in just a moment. Stay right there.
The freestyle approach, I don't think serves us as a country.
The proof is in the pudding, just going to meet someone, one would have to see, what matters is outcome.
The Prime Minister always encourages premiers and ministers to go down and continue to work with our colleagues south of the border, no matter if it's a governor, a senator, or congresspeople, or part of the administration. I think we have to continue on with the pressure. So the more people that can get down there and have a conversation, all the power to you.
Reaction there to Conservative MP Jamil Jivani's solo trade mission to Washington. Jivani arrived in D.C. this week, a trip he says is aimed at improving Canada-U.S. trade relations. Reports say he's met with Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Vice President J.D. Vance, and his wife, Usha Vance. Jivani and the vice president are longtime friends, having gone to Yale Law School together. However, his office would not confirm to CTV News whether these meetings did take place or who he has met with while in Washington. Mr. Jivani did post on X that he had, quote, productive meetings with the White House and State Department yesterday, and that the president asked him to pass along a message. Tell the Canadians I love them. And just in the last hour or so, he has posted this on X,
where I've been having some very productive, promising, and positive conversations with the White House, with the State Department, with senators representing border states that we do a lot of business with in Canada. And I got to tell you, I'm feeling hopeful and optimistic that we can get something really good done for Canadian workers and businesses.
Our front bench is here to talk about that with me in studio. Former BC Premier Christy Clark, she's a senior advisor with Bennett Jones. Marco Mendicino is former chief of staff to Prime Minister Mark Carney and a former Liberal cabinet minister. He's now a senior counsel and strategic advisor for Castles. CTV political analyst and former Conservative industry minister James Moore is with us. He's now a policy advisor at Edelman. And rounding us out this evening, former federal Conservative cabinet minister and MP Monte Solberg. He's the CEO of New West Public Affairs. Hi, everybody. Happy Thursday. Christy, glad to see you here. I'll start with you. We had James in studio a few days ago, but he's back home, I guess. I wanted to ask you about the trip in and of itself and what you think is really behind it.
Well, first of all, I think Doug Ford has got a point. The more of us that go down there that have a relationship, we should use it. That's great. It's good that he's doing it, and it's fantastic. He, if he went to school with J.D. Vance, he might be able to leverage some of this. I think the trick is, though, in what's he saying, and because he hasn't been very friendly about the government's agenda, which is the Canadian agenda. So one hopes that when he's down there, he's supporting what the government's doing, because Donald Trump is a master negotiator. He understands that dividing people is a great way to get what you want. And if he sees just any hint of division in the Canadian position, that's, I don't think, to our advantage. So it's a risk. I think it's a risk worth taking. But, as Francois-Philippe Champagne said, the proof will be in the pudding. So
on balance, James, going into this, he certainly said, I don't purport to represent the Prime Minister, but I would like to help advance these negotiations in any way that I can. He did, though, yesterday, however, to Christy's point, flag like one division around the issue of China. I take the point that the motivation is, perhaps like, I don't know everything about Mr. Jivani, but let's take him at his word that he's going there to do the right thing. Trump is the X factor, right? Like if he sees anything, any sort of, weakness in the Canadian Confederation and in unity, I imagine he wouldn't hesitate to exacerbate it.
I think your second point is right, but also I think it's fair to Mr. Jivani to say that the origin story of his engagement in all this was actually a couple months ago, where he offered to try to find a way to work with the Liberal government and to be a useful part of the machinery that the government is putting in place in order to have some rapprochement with the American government. So there's that. But your second point, I think, is entirely true as well. But this is the American government, and certainly on trade files, it's a one-man band. It's President of the United States, and whether it's Secretary Bessent or Secretary Lutnick or others, we try to sort of overanalyze and parse the words of people whose influence is, frankly, I think, pretty marginal. My guess is the President of the United States is all over the road, all over the map. His policies are, frankly, incoherent from day to day. And so the best thing for Canada to do domestically is to do what Stephen Harper talked about on the weekend, what Prime Minister Carney talked about in Davos, where I think there's a broad Canadian consensus, which is to continue to build out global market access and do the things we need to do to make the country more sturdy domestically. And, if Mr. Jivani has personal relationships and can put a smiling face and a warm handshake and make those connections on a one-by-one basis, in the long arc of the Canada-U.S. relationship, that's net positive.
It's interesting because as I was watching all this take place, Marco, this week, I was thinking back to what feels like a very different time, but the same president was there in the first round of NAFTA negotiations, in which a ton of people were employed by the federal government to go and plead Canada's case, right? At all levels of government, all different political stripes, members of the opposition. I remember traveling down to Washington, D.C. to do the same thing. And there was like a big discussion about what Canada's case was. It's very, very closed at this point. It's very, very different. That isn't the norm, which is part of why I think everyone took notice of Mr. Jivani's trip. What do you think about the trip?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And if I'm not mistaken, James Moore, one of our esteemed co-panelists, was part of that bipartisan effort. And to be sure, bipartisan unity at this fragile moment is crucial to international diplomacy. But so too is being coordinated. And I think one of the foundations of successful international diplomacy is not only what the message is and having discipline around that, but who's carrying the message. And that's why countries have established protocols on receiving delegations and recognized officials. And even taking Mr. Jivani at his word, I mean, I'll coin James Moore again, it can't be a one-man show. And so that's why we have the Prime Minister go down and meet with the President. That's why we have trade ministers who meet their counterparts. That's why we have parliamentary delegations, so that there can be coherency, consistency, and credibility and follow through when it comes to that message. So I think for Jamil, and notwithstanding our political disagreements, we have a cordial relationship. It's about channeling his energy, and what at face value he is saying is a sincere effort to try to help the government navigate these very delicate times.
Yeah, two things about sort of the efforts before also. Like Mr. Jivani, to James's point, Monte, had said for a while now that he'd been making overtures even directly to the Prime Minister's office to be able to help. On the flip side, if this is a solo mission, he did get briefed, the Prime Minister said, by the minister who oversees trade between our two countries, Dominic LeBlanc. I had Minister Joly on earlier because Mr. Jivani said he was going to meet with GM today. I asked her if there was any conversation in advance of that meeting, and she said a bunch of stuff, but she also said no, that there hadn't been a conversation, just to give the full picture of all the back and forth. Your thoughts on the trip?
Well, I think it's important that he goes down and tries to leverage that relationship that he has. To me, it only makes sense. And in fact, if he had the relationship and wasn't using it, he'd be criticized for that. So it's important that he do what he can. I take the point that we need to speak with great care to make sure that we're saying the same things, and we don't allow the Americans to exploit differences. But I think the other important point is the fact that he met with senators and governors in border states and things like that. Donald Trump is not going to be president of the United States forever. These trade relations continue on state to province all across the country. And we need to continue to keep those relationships warm, because who knows what will happen after the midterm elections. Not immediately clear that Donald Trump will still be president. He might not be. Who knows? It's certainly conceivable that Congress could act against him and make life very difficult for him. So let's keep all those relationships warm. And if Jamil has a special relationship with J.D. Vance, by all means, let's use it.
Okay, I got to take a quick commercial break. Part of what former Prime Minister Stephen Harper said this week was all about the relationship with the United States, advocating for reducing reliance on the U.S. as rapidly as possible. This week marks 2 decades since Stephen Harper became Prime Minister. After a short break, we're going to talk about how politics has changed over the last 2 decades and what our panelists were doing at that time. Back with the Front Bench after a short break.
To be clear, these realities mean that we must reduce our dependence on the U.S. in order to protect our sovereignty and our economy. But we must do so also clearly understanding that by all the critical measures of international relations, America will still remain our principal partner in the world. Our national conversation must be mature enough to acknowledge that many of the difficulties we now face as a country cannot be blamed on Donald Trump. In too many cases, they stem from bad decisions by our own government.
Canada has to rapidly reduce reliance on the U.S., though many of our country's challenges can't be blamed on President Trump. That's the message former Prime Minister Stephen Harper delivered in front of a big crowd of Conservatives last night at a gala dinner marking the 20th anniversary of when he became Prime Minister. The world has changed a lot in the last two decades, rather. So how has politics in Canada evolved over that period? We thought it was a good opportunity to discuss with the front bench. Christy, Mark Mendicino, James Moore, and Monte Solberg are all back. James, I'll start with you because, as I mentioned, you were here a few days ago. You were there for the portrait unveiling. Lots of interesting, speeches this week from former Prime Minister Harper as well as Prime Minister Carney. Like a lot of nice Canadian moments, actually, over the past few days. What do you take away from it, and what were you doing 20 years ago?
Sitting in the front row with Monte Solberg laughing at the state of affairs of the country, probably. I have fond memories of that. But to be honest, 20 years ago, I was honored to be part of Prime Minister Harper's government and cabinet. And I think the clip that you showed there of Stephen Harper reminds me of the virtues that he has always had as a leader. That, Preston Manning used to say there's two kinds of people in politics, those who want to be something and those who want to do something. And I always felt that was something that there needed to be a shining sort of commitment of people who aspire to high office and the opportunity to be Prime Minister of the country. I see you showing pictures of me right now. The ravages of time are coming to mind, but not
at all, not at all.
Yeah, no, but I think the clip that you showed there of Stephen Harper, I think is what I take away a lot about his time as Prime Minister. Control what you can control and try to make it better. Prepare for the things that you can control and try to have the proper defenses around you. Keep your eye on the horizon. Know that circumstances may change, and surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, who have good character, who have sound judgment, and work collaboratively as best you can, and know that the unexpected may hit you on a broadside, and the country will survive it as long as you are studious about your work, thoughtful about your commitment, and you, again, surround yourself with people of character and substance, and the country will endure. And Stephen Harper, I think, did that, and I hope that Prime Minister Carney is learning those lessons, and I trust that he is.
Monte, you were getting sworn in as immigration minister, if I read the information correctly that my producer put together. A little bit from your perspective on, oh my gosh, look at that picture. You're with the Dalai Lama. On what that period was like for you, and how you think things have changed since then.
Well, it was extraordinarily exciting, and it was just the greatest honor I've ever had in my life. It was just so damn exciting. There's no other way to put it, and it was pretty bracing too. Walking into, your department for the first time, they hand you briefing books that it would reach the ceiling. There were so many of them, and then having to wrap your mind around a file that spends $5 billion a year and lands 300,000 Canadian people into Canada, and making sure the good ones get in and the bad ones stay out. It was really a challenging time. And I would say, just to follow up on what James said, the thing that struck me about the Prime Minister was he put the importance of the economy came first, because we couldn't do anything else unless we had a strong fiscal position. And he just made that job one. It allowed us to come out of the 2008 recession in the best shape of any G7 country. We balanced the budget, we cut taxes. I mean, what he did, and he deserves so much credit because he really steered the ship. What he did was extraordinary. And almost, the idea that a balanced budget should be an extraordinary thing is crazy, but it really should be the norm. And, I hope Prime Minister Carney does learn from Stephen Harper. They know each other well. In many ways, I think they probably think alike on a number of issues, not everything. But I hope he picks up those lessons and runs with them.
Well, they had a lot of nice things to say about each other this week. It was a nice thing to watch at the portrait unveiling. Christy, what were you doing 20 years ago? And I'm going to ask the same thing. How do you think politics has changed?
20 years ago, I was Deputy Premier, Minister of Education in Gordon Campbell's government. And then I quit. I had a little 2-year-old. And then not long after, I went and started the Christy Clark Show on CKNW Radio. It was a call-in radio show, which I loved doing. I mean, you got experience at doing that too. So fun. It was, I mean, I loved, it was fun back in those, oh God, there.
You look so nice, so sweet. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, yeah. You know, I look at the pictures and I think, how fat was I back then? And there, so then I went and I ran for. Then
You
I
looked
went
great,
and ran
Christy.
for mayor.
You look great.
Thank you. And I lost the nomination by 60 votes to the guy who eventually became mayor. So, yeah, that was 20 years ago. How do I think it's changed? I think that for women in particular, it's become really, really brutal because social media has just made it impossible for women to feel comfortable in the realm. And the feedback that we get about how fat we are, how wrinkled we are, the color of our hair, the way we walk, the sound of our voice, it's like, it's just so painful, and I spend a lot of time trying to talk women into getting into politics so we can continue to change it. But most of them now, it's getting harder and harder to do it. So I would say, from a female, you know, the gents have pointed out lots of things that I agree with, but boy, from a women's perspective, it's really gotten a lot harder.
I'm glad you brought that up. Feels like a different world from a social media perspective.
It does. Like, you walk around with your phone and you go on TV, and people are just. You're dumb, you're fat, you're ugly.
Well, you're none of those things. Nobody is, but
Here.
Online isn't real, but it does exist. Okay, I saved you for last, Marco, because you were basically a baby. You actually have a baby in your arms. You weren't yet in politics, right?
No, I was not. No, I was not. In fact, all of my friends on this panel were in politics in one role or another, and that picture that's up right there, that's me. Dad, prosecutor by day, dad by night, all night long. You know, the bleak eyes there are me trying to juggle the writing of factums and getting ready for trials, and also changing diapers and doing whatever I could to support Diana, my wife, and Michaela, who's in my arms there. She's an adult now, so that certainly has changed. But yeah, I was, you know, it's funny. I was quite starstruck by politicians 20 years ago. And I think many of the clips that you showed there probably planted some seeds subconsciously. Because I think, you know, jumping into politics, and it is hard. I agree with everything that my colleagues have said, especially Christy. It's become a lot more polarizing and difficult. But I think that's why this week, and having Prime Minister Carney do the unveiling of the portrait with Stephen Harper was so important. And, you know, I had the great privilege and honor to be present for some of those early discussions between Prime Minister Mark Carney just after he was sworn in, and some of the conversations that he had with Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And there is a lot of respect there. And that integrity, I think, really shone through this week, because at this fragile moment, I do think Canadians really need to come together. And, you know, I was thinking about some of the shining examples of unity among Canadians over the last 20 years, whether it's in sports, in the Olympics. Christy, you'll remember the 2010, well, actually, James, you too, the 2010 Olympics in Vancouver, or when we have, you know, national emergencies and crises. You know, Canadians, we contribute to the Red Cross. We tend to look after each other. Or right now, in the midst of the rupture moment, as the Prime Minister has described it, it's really important, I think, to see politicians and elected leaders come together, because Canadians really, I think, are expecting that and need that unity right now. And kudos to Stephen Harper and to Mark Carney, I think, for demonstrating the best qualities of that kind of solidarity at this moment.
Yeah, not a bad
And
week to
Prime
be
Minister
Canadian.
Chrétien.
Thanks, everybody.
And Chrétien, too. Yeah,
And
Mr. C.
Prime Minister
you're right.
Cannot
Thank
forget
you.
Mr. C. That's right.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Our front bench, Christy Clark, Marco Mendicino, James Moore, and Monte Solberg. We're back in a moment. Thanks, everyone. We've got a lot more coverage and reaction to the federal government's auto strategy coming up on CTV News Channel. I'll leave Power Play there. Thanks for watching.